Okay. Okay. Edwin.
Okay, we're on. All right. Welcome to Seattle Neighborhood Media Crier. Today we've got I think, a really interesting program. This is a subject that I find really interesting about community technology in Seattle, and there's a lot going on in that regard. And we have the David Keys, who heads up the Community Technology Department for the City of Seattle. So,
Hi.
David.
Hi, glad to be here joining you today.
Yeah. So I think that we're just going to zip right into. Why don't we start with the fact that the city has just brought out this technology access and adoption report, and we might give some sort of quick overview of that. Yeah, and then where we are from there.
Okay, great. So just a little bit of background for folks. So I manage a community technology program at the City of Seattle. We're part of the Department of Information Technology in a group called Electronic Communications. And so that includes, I work alongside the city's web team and the folks from the Seattle channel and the group that does cable franchising. And some years ago, as the city was putting information online, decided it was also important to make sure that residents had sufficient access and skills to be able to get to city services, to use technology effectively for education, for jobs, for online civic engagement, and accessing essential services. So in our group, we focus on a few areas of digital inclusion or digital equity, and we can talk about those more. But one of those aspects is also then for us to look at how connected are Seattle residents. Do we have sufficient access to computers, to internet, to the devices? And so as part of that, we started a project in cooperation with our Citizens Technology Advisory Board, which is also known by the acronym CTAB. And so that, we can talk more about that Technology Advisory Board, but it's been a really important aspect, having kind of community input into what we do. And so we've, since 2000, actually, in the last 14 years, we've done a series of 4 assessments of community technology adoption, how connected are residents. And we just came out with our most recent one in May of this year. And so just showing there's our Technology Advisory Board, and that's half appointed by the mayor and half by City Council, and then there are committees of the Advisory Board where other residents can participate, and they really help give us guidance and help get input from the community on what directions the city should take.
Great. So maybe we could talk just a little bit about the summary information on what came out in the report this May, and then from there, to the mayor's points about what he sees as his top 3 priorities.
Yeah. So if we, so our technology access and adoption report, in short, what we did is we did a random telephone survey with about 800 residents, and we did 20% of those by cell phone. So kind of looking at that technology access and adoption report. And you can find this on the web at seattle.gov/tech/indicators. So just here's a few of our findings, and let me just also just talk briefly about kind of how we did it as well, because I think that's an important piece. So we did 803 random telephone surveys. We also did additional sampling to make sure it reflected some demographic of the city. We did an online survey and had over 1,600 residents participate in that. And then we did 9 focus groups in 6 different languages, and with the African American community and disabilities group, as well as in Vietnamese, Somali, Ethiopian, Chinese, and in Spanish, to get a good sampling and get a mix of the sort of random telephone and a little bit deeper dive. And if we kind of in general, one of the things we found, so there's about 85% of residents have internet at home. That still means there's about 93,000 residents in Seattle that don't have internet at home. And about 6% of residents rely on their smartphone only as their way to get internet access. And kind of interesting, maybe not surprising, but interesting that there's a higher percentage, almost double that, that are folks that just have, let's see, of younger folks from 18 to 25 who rely only on smartphone for their own internet, only internet connection, and of African Americans who rely on that. There was certainly a kind of as we looked at the focus group of underserved communities, there's certainly a higher percentage of those folks that don't have internet at home as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we look at devices.
Yeah, David, can I just jump in for a second? One of the things that surprised me when I looked at this, I mean, certain things I think one expects, that minority communities and low-income folks will have lower percentages of access. I was surprised, however, about the disabled community, that there was also a population with very low usage. And that seemed incongruous to me in that there's so much, I have numbers of friends who are disabled, and there's so much that's available online for them. And I wondered about that, and also I wondered about, to what degree that's going to be, or to what degree that's a concern for your department or for the city in general.
Yeah, it's certainly a concern as we kind of look at the sort of key communities that that need help both with access and with skills. I think for the disabilities community, yes, we found that there are less, from the random telephone survey, that there are less members of our community with disabilities who have internet and are using it effectively. Some really interesting things that we also heard from the focus group that are really important, is for people with disabilities, technology also offers an incredible opportunity for them. So one of the things, for instance, a mobile device or a smartphone or tablet that somebody can take when a blind person is trying to navigate the city and gets dropped off someplace and needs to find, if they get dropped off at the wrong place or they need to find the next location that they're going to, having a smartphone with an audio navigation can really enable them to just go about daily life. So that's really critical. The burden that they have in transit sometimes, having a good internet connection at home really improves their quality of life and saves them what can be a lot more time to try and get someplace. That's really important.
That makes total sense. I know, again, from some anecdotal experience from friends of mine, that and I know that it's another initiative that the city is really pursuing for a number of reasons, but having all manner of information and documents online, again, for somebody who's like vision impaired, is a huge benefit because, of course, with an electronic device, you can enlarge the size of something. You have much more choices than you would have if you were just looking at a paper document.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I mean, I think we've seen over the last 6-7 years or so a lot of growth in the applications that are available, like Zoom Text, and that Microsoft is building in a lot more adaptive functionality into Office, for instance. Really, to their credit, they've been paying a lot of attention and really working hard on accessibility. As the city is designing its web pages, we try and look at making our information as accessible to screen readers as possible. We've also supported some community organizations that are providing adaptive technology and training to community members. So some of our Technology Matching Fund grant programs, Technology Matching Fund grants, have gone to organizations to assist disabled members of our community. And there's some great work going on in the community from some of those folks and from the library on that.
Yeah. Um, and so, in terms of access, I was going to bring that up. So, again, I was a little surprised that there wasn't, more access at community centers, but the library has very high marks in terms of that being a place where people can get online readily
Yeah, I think.
and do.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's the I think in general, what we still see is even people who have computers. So in a sense, we've kind of got a few different communities of people that use the public access around the city. Um, and so we've got a listing of where those access sites are. A number of them are in public facilities. So the libraries continue to get used really, really well and are really important places for people to go. Whether you have a computer at home or not, what we also find is people want to stop in and get online and go look something up. Or people with limited internet connectivity at home want a place that has higher speed access that they can go so that they can, anyway, anything from Skyping with their friends to being able to do some graphic work to be able to finish up their business plan, to be able to apply for jobs online and so on.
Yeah, right. The latter I know is huge. As you know,
Mhm.
I do a lot of volunteer work with the homeless, and they make tremendous use of online resources at the library.
Really
And a
good point.
surprising
Yep.
number of folks may be homeless, but the first thing they try to get is a smartphone and or a laptop because they know that it's critical to getting employment.
Yeah, and what the libraries are providing, they're providing the computers, but they're also providing Wi-Fi access.
Right, right.
So for people with limited data plans or that just have like iPod touches, then those become really kind of critical connectors for them to stay in touch with family, friends, and jobs and opportunities and training.
Yeah, exactly.
In addition to the library centers, we also have, through my group, we and the facilities group at the City Finance and Administrative Services, we've got 6 public computer centers in our neighborhood service centers.
Hmm.
And those are located around the city. And then there are public computers in almost all of the Parks and Rec community centers.
Hmm.
We've got sort of, together with the Parks Department and a nonprofit called Associated Recreation Council, there are 6 rec tech sites, we call them, that are learning labs and access in Parks and Rec community centers. So those are important access points too, and they provide both training and that drop-in access, and then they also provide things like, along with the library, in the spring or winter, they provide access to the e-filing for the earned income tax credit.
Hmm. I
Uh,
was going to ask about training because I know the library does that. I know they do that. How significant is that, and how extensive is training in other languages, um, and what kind of and what kind of stats do you have on how successful that is? I've heard again sort of anecdotal stories about how often it will be like the youngest member of an immigrant family that starts to use the stuff, and then they drag in their parents, and therefore having something that's like friendly in a local community center or a library is way less scary than many other things, and they can find or they can find like a few other folks in their community, and all of them get online.
yeah, it's a really good point. As you talk about the importance of the different access points around the city, um, in the random survey, we may have seen a little bit less than you expected in terms of use of other facilities. But in our work with all the focus groups, what we found was that those kinds of trusted, culturally relevant, multi-service centers out in the community are really vibrant and important access points. So, so for instance, what we see is you're right that what will happen is somebody will hear about a program or they're trying to get email. What places like anything from the Somali Community Services, Chinese Information Service Center, El Centro de la Raza, Consejo, could kind of go on with a lot of different really important community cultural groups. that are that we've helped fund to provide technology training and access. And so they are what I think of as information ambassadors. So somebody will get help getting online to send email for the first time. Um, they'll learn about some program. It may have a link to an online application or something. In the lab, in the computer centers, will help them translate, get online, maybe help identify resources in other languages. They provide training. A really interesting example is a Helping Link in the International District. They have a bilingual training in Vietnamese and English. So they'll be providing training in native language and helping people learn English at the same time they're learning technology skills and connecting them to essential services.
Cool. Yeah, I think we can get it up. I'd like to spend just a moment on Mayor Murray's top 3 points that he's highlighted, and to mention that we plan to follow up with this with the Chief Technology Officer of the city, Matt Miller, next month to go into more depth. But I just thought, given that this is just right out on the mayor's blog, it's worth to mention his points of reducing regulatory barriers, explore public-private partnerships, explore municipal broadband. The last one was a surprise to me because I know the city has kind of danced around that before, but that's, I guess, making a comeback as something they're considering.
Yeah, I think the sort of important thing is Mayor Murray has really come in strong with a really strong commitment to social equity, to innovation, to use of technology, and so along with establishing his Office of Policy and Innovation, he's really said, how do we really make better broadband happen? He's also called for a digital equity initiative to really step that up. So some folks may have heard about recent announcements with this and CenturyLink expansion, and so so one of those 3 points is to look at all options on the table and what's feasible, what makes sense. So you'll be hearing more about that in the future as well. And as we look at overall digital equity, digital inclusion, we keep looking at the kind of 3 things. How do we really make access happen? How do we support good content and training? And how do we help also get folks into technology jobs so that we can hire locally and keep our industry?
Oh, good. I'm glad you mentioned that because, we talked just briefly before we started about, some other examples of how other places around the country are approaching this. And you mentioned Chattanooga, and I'd recently heard a piece on NPR where my understanding is they made a strategic, really political and business decision to support a public high-speed broadband network, specifically looking at what hoping that this would give them an edge in the marketplace and in job creation and make them more attractive to high-tech companies. Interesting.
Yeah, I think one other thing that would be worth mentioning right now that's related to that is that we're actually just now starting to go through the process of cable refranchising, or we're partway through the process of cable refranchising. So there's been some community meetings about it. Our franchise agreement with Comcast is coming up. We'll be sitting down with them and saying, what do we do with that? There's some really significant public benefits that we got from the last franchise agreement with them. So if you go to that Office of Cable Communications, seattle.gov/cable, you can see information about the cable franchises and the rate information and the refranchising process. And
great opportunity for citizen engagement.
Yeah, so there's a great opportunity for citizen engagement. We've been collecting information from the community about what they want. There was information in our technology access and adoption study about cable and about people's interest both in high speed. We do know that cable subscribership is down about 13% over the last few years. Not surprising, but the cable companies are still in a pretty strong position. In the last Comcast franchise, a couple of things that the community got. We continue to sort of have a really strong consumer bill of rights. An opportunity for consumer protection and responsiveness. We also got money to. We got a number of broadband connections, cable broadband connections that we provide to community organizations. So both through our agreement with Wave Cable and through Comcast, we are able to provide free internet connections to these community organizations that are providing access and training. We also got money to help for a youth civic engagement project called Puget Sound Off to increase the programming on the Seattle channel, support some of the public access television. So there's a number of really important benefits that we are able to negotiate in that, and unfortunately we don't have much control over rate increases. But again, that's an opportunity for the community to have input, and it's important as we go through the cable refranchising process with Comcast right now.
Yeah, that I'm just thinking about youth and wondering, to what degree. I mean, you mentioned the Seattle channel, which I happen to be a big fan of. I'm also a huge fan of KUOW, and they have a great youth program, Radioactive. In fact, I've tuned into a number of terrific programs they produced. Are people picking that stuff up, and is that moving across platforms so it's more available to people in a variety of ways? I mean, Radioactive would be cool to tweet,
Yeah, well, there's certainly, so Radioactive is certainly putting stuff out over different media. I mean, I think that distribution platform continues to be really multiple. We're seeing a huge increase in the number of people that are watching Seattle Channel online at seattlechannel.org. The public access television facility, their programming is both available online and on cable. There's also really kind of neat community programs. Some of our funds have gone to support a project in cooperation with the YMCA called PugetSoundoff.org, which is a blog site that both teaches youth digital media skills, how to blog, how to do video. It's a place where different youth can come together as kind of a hub to do things, and also it's made a difference in partnering with the city. So, for instance, a really cool thing that happened at Puget Sound Off this last year was that they did some videos and interviews with youth about what folks would like to see, what youth would like to see in the next police commissioner. And the mayor's office used that to help inform the police commission site search and put that up on their website. There was discussion there about the $15 minimum wage. And so I encourage folks to get in touch with them and take a look at that as well. There's other really interesting youth media projects going on, and that may be another whole program for you guys to consider doing. But for instance, at 23rd and Jackson, there's a great little community group called Multimedia Resource Training Institute, or MMRTI. And they've done training, like they do at Ethio Media Project, where they're teaching youth to do video production to cover the East African community. And then they're putting that up online, and they're putting that up on the Seattle Community Media. So they've done some really great stuff in the Central District and with East African youth. So
does that makes me think of, and I don't know where it is right now, but the low power radio stuff, that some of which, I mean, I don't think a whole lot of applications were filed. I don't know where they ended up, but I know there were some groups like that were looking at going for developing low power stations for their particular ethnic group.
Yeah, there were. it's a great thing that this is starting to happen. So just kind of a brief update on that. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but there were about a dozen or so applicants for low power FM right in Seattle area. Just a quick background piece for folks that don't know. The FCC decided a couple of years ago already, with a lot of input from folks around the country, including our Citizens Advisory Board and others, but that they would open up additional channel space for low power community FM radio stations. And then they put out a request for applications for those. And so they're at a stage where they've kind of identified the initial set of sites for potential approval, and there's a little period where people can comment or could challenge those sites if they feel like if another radio station feels like the bandwidth is going to interfere with theirs or has a technical problem with those stations.
Mm-hmm.
There was an interesting challenge to one of a proposed station at Pike Place Market, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And the folks that were doing that ended up withdrawing. There's projects that are potentially going forward in Ballard, South Seattle, Rainier Valley Radio, kind of a really neat group.
Yeah, that's one that I'd heard about because that's near where I live, yeah.
Yeah, Southeast Effective Development and a consortium are developing a community radio station. So it was really a great opportunity for more diversity of programming and another way to find out what's happening really locally. I mean, I love the idea of, can I drive through town and just pick up my localized radio as I'm going through to get what's happening and really locally, culturally, and also develop new DJs, new folks that can cooperate and do partnerships with our commercial stations and with folks like KOW,
well,
and so on.
Yeah, and keeping that as something I know that your department keeps an eye on, and that sounds like the mayor is very aware of as well. Keeping that really rich mix of media. I know a point that was made in some of the arguments I heard about some of the low power applications was that for folks that are immigrant community that may not have don't have a computer, don't have keyboarding skills, don't have English, radio is a terrific medium for them. Readily accessible, familiar, easy, and so it's cool that that's proceeding, and it really makes sense to my mind.
Yeah, we've got a really rich and growing ethnic media community here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, again, a really a great group to do a program about. And our Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs has been working a lot with them. But we really do have just a really rich ethnic media community and multilingual community, and if we can, a lesson to all of us in terms of how do we present information and giving people options in the
right.
cultural, language, visual and vocal format that people can receive it the most and works best for them.
Yeah, exactly. Makes me, reminds me of another site that I bumped into recently. Again, I do a lot of work with the homeless and disenfranchised, and YWCA has really jumped into social media in a big way. I've found it really impressive. They launched a site separate. You maybe you're aware of this. Probably you are. They decided to brand it separately from the YWCA, and it's called Fire Steel. Platform for Social Change. Terrific site with very wide variety of clips, interviews. I'm looking at it right now. Interview with Rob McKenna, up on and on and on. I mean, just a whole variety of different things covering. Again, talk about civic engagement, from a very different perspective.
Yeah. I think I'll come back. Actually, it's a good segue for a moment to just come back to our technology adoption study.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, both there's great stuff like this happening, and it's really awesome. I think what is kind of a challenge to us and at the city, and I'd provide as a challenge to neighborhood groups, and to folks who live in our communities and the companies that are here. So the question is in part building audience and what is the diversity of your audience as you're using those media, and what's the best way to get to folks. So in our technology adoption study, for instance, we asked people how they want to be contacted by government or community group, how they want to give their opinion, and also how they want to receive urgent alerts. And then we also asked, just looked at what's just mainly looking at Facebook and Twitter in terms of what folks were using, but kind of a couple just quick stats that I think are useful. So one is that there's 13% that don't use email right now. About a quarter of folks are still not comfortable with attachments, which is really interesting. So as you're sending out announcements for things, don't forget to put the text in the body of your email.
Right.
We do have some differences in terms of comfort. So, for instance, there 2/3 of folks were comfortable adding an app, but that was less for African Americans and Latinos.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if we just look at the sort of social media piece, so certainly Facebook is much more well used than Twitter. So, Facebook is used by about 2/3 of residents, and about a third using Twitter. And then you begin to look at, and this is something that's up on our site in terms of those who use it and those who use it often. So if you're doing a campaign and you're using social media for it, if you want to look at the sort of slice of who you're going to reach and how you do marketing, one of the things that we're encouraging is kind of to recognize some of the differences by age or by population. Certainly, particularly African Americans, is a huge growing use of social media there. I think one of the things that was also really interesting recently was use of Twitter by the African American community with what's happening in about images of black youth, where they use Twitter to post alternate images. So people would post two images of themselves, one in the tougher look, one in the more family or job look or whatever, two different looks, and they actually influenced NBC's portrayal of the young man that was killed in Missouri that way.
Oh, right.
But I think the point is, to think about as we're doing community meetings or outreach, to also not just assume your entire audience is really comfortable using social media and how, but to think about incorporating the training as part of your work, or if you're using it for community meetings, to show people how you use it, give them a chance to do hands-on alongside and to mentor others on use of it.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. In a different aspect, something else that I'm involved in is emergency preparedness, and just the other weekend was the annual Northwest Citizen Corps Expo. And they had a whole variety of workshops. And one of the ones that I went to and got a great deal out of was use of social media and emergency preparedness and communication. And great presentation. But again, it's not going to reach everybody. However, it's a spectacular way to reach a large number of people incredibly quickly, which, of course, in an emergency situation matters a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. And as we're looking at that, then that mix of texting. There was fairly high interest in using texting. Still email was the preferred way to get information from the city, in community groups. But we know almost 70% of those 18 to 25 prefer to get urgent information from the city via text. So it's thinking about these distributive networks or federated networks. So kind of working together to make sure folks know how to sign up for alerts, to make sure that they, when you get an alert out, that it gets redistributed to the community, that you pass that urgent alert on. And as you talked about earlier, making sure it gets, translated where it needs to, and gets distributed in other ways. You get that urgent alert, you put it up at the hair salon.
Mhm.
So how do you again use our offline, our in person, and our online environment to really distribute these information? But great
Yeah,
opportunity
exactly.
there.
Yeah, it reminds me of one other medium that I make a great deal of use of in my own neighborhood, and I know the city supports, but community blogs. Yeah,
Yeah.
um, yet another medium. Well, I know that we're kind of bumping up against time here. Anything else that we've missed that you'd like to add? I mean, this is it's a huge amount to cover here, but I think that at least if you've given people a little taste of what's out there, what's coming, things they can get involved in, like the mayor's initiatives, the cable refranchise, um, and but what else? What else? Last
Yeah.
sort of wrap up here.
Yeah, so just a couple other kind of quick mentions. So overall, for sort of our information about digital inclusion, digital equity programs, and also help finding the public computing centers, getting training, or also getting low-cost internet. Seattle.gov/tech is kind of our center point for those information. Um, we've got some great kind of tips that we've been doing our Get Online campaign to help sort of low adopters learn more about resources online that has like including it's got like tips for how to find how to evaluate a health website. So we're doing a number of kind of these themes. So we've got one on jobs on the internet and tips for more effectively looking for a job online. So just want to make sure folks know about that. They're also available at seattle.gov/getonline. And the low-cost internet programs for people um, who need help getting a computer or getting a lower-cost internet program. Both Comcast and CenturyLink right now provide about a $10 a month internet connection for low-income families. There's some requirements on it, but those are linked from our site, or people can contact us at the city at 684-0600, and we can connect you to there. So the CenturyLink has the Internet Basics, and Comcast has the Internet Essentials program. Then there's a couple others, and then a great group in Seattle, Interconnection, does computer refurbishing, and so for low-income residents, they offer a $99 refurbished laptop. So they're located in Fremont. Also a great group, and we've got a growing group in Seattle that's really active in Portland and some areas called Free Geek. So geeks of various levels that are really interested in helping others out. There's a group that's working with a robotics class at the Filipino Community Center right now. But check them out too. Look for Seattle Free Geek.
Oh, cool. Great. Those are terrific resources. David, thank you so much. This has been really, I've got like a page of unreadable notes, so I'll have to follow up later. But we've got it all out there. Thank you. And yeah, we've got a bunch of programs we can follow on this, and certainly we'll be following up with the Chief Technology Officer next month.
Great. And thanks to Media Crier and all you folks for doing this and putting this online and using Google Hangout as a
Yeah.
tool.
Good.